You're listening to the Maritime Gardening Podcast brought to you by Bessie Seeds. Today we've got Ken Johnson from the University of Illinois Extension here to talk about ladybugs. Who is Ken Johnson? He has a bachelor's degree in biology from the Illinois College. He's got a doctorate in plant medicine from the University of Florida. He's a horticulture educator with the University of Illinois Extension. His focus is on fruit and vegetable production, pest management, and beneficial insects, something we're all very interested in. And he's one of the authors of the Good Growing blog and the Good Growing podcast, one of the Good Growing podcast hosts. Ken, say hello.
Hello, thanks for having me.
No, it's great. I'm glad we found you, and I'm glad we have you on the show. So you have you've got your own blog, and is that through the University of Illinois Extension?
Yeah, that's the University of Illinois. Colleague of mine, Chris Enroth, and I, we do both the blog and the podcast. And we have another colleague, Emily Swihart, who does the blog with us. So it's not a one-man show there.
And you also write these articles, and that's how I found you. I was just reading about multicolored ladybugs, AKA Asian ladybugs, and I just noticed you were the author and sent you the email. I thought, let's talk about it. That'd be a great thing to do an episode on, because some people, you see those things flying around, you're like, are they a problem? What's the deal with these things? So that's not the blog. That's your service with the University of Illinois Extension. Is that correct? Or
So
is
the
that
blog is part of, I guess, part of my job. I do it as part of my job.
I see. Okay, and just so people know, because it's been a little, well, not too long, but I always want to direct people to, whenever I have a question about anything regarding to gardening, I don't go on Facebook and ask people what they think. I don't Google it, and I don't ask Chat GPT. I usually type a very short version of whatever I want to learn about, and then I put the word extension. If I typed in ladybugs extension, or if I have a problem with powdery mildew, I type the word extension. Then first 3 or 4 hits on Google will be some article written by someone from a university extension. I'll usually read 3 or 4 articles just to see, because they come at it differently, and see what the common points are. And that's how I will quickly develop a reasonably informed opinion about a topic, as opposed to just asking strangers on Facebook who are going to tell me to put foliar spray or to pee on it or do something, whatever, put antacid tablets underneath the plant or whatever. Yeah, I can't stress enough to viewers what a great resource the agricultural extensions are. And how long have you been doing that for?
I have been here for 11 years.
11 years, that's great. Okay, we're going to talk about, I think at the end, teaser, Ken actually worked at Disney World in his capacity as a plant medicine specialist. So that's going to be like one of the things we talk about as we go along here. But first, we're going to talk about ladybugs, but that's just our teaser. So, I mean, just to give us a quick rundown of your work. I mean, so you got your doctorate, and then was Disney World your first job, or like what kind of jobs have you had with a doctorate in plant medicine?
So Disney World was in between bachelor's and doctorate and grad school.
Okay.
So that kind of got the ball rolling on all of that. So after graduating from University of Florida, I came to Extension. So this is my, I guess, first and only big kid job, so to speak.
Wow, that's great though. I'm that kind of a guy. I'm kind of like, get comfortable and stay there, and get it all
Yep.
figured out, and get a house and just get on with life. I totally get that. Makes
Exactly.
sense to me. So, do you have your own garden?
I do. So we got one at home, and then with work with Extension, we've got a garden too that I kind of take care of as for work as well.
Oh, so tell me about the work garden first. So what's the scale of that? Like, what do you grow there?
So it's a about 3 acres that was donated to us fairly recently. So we're working on building it out. So we've planted a bunch of oak trees, kind of try to get an oak savanna established on like an acre of it or so. That's just in the start. We've got a caterpillar tunnel, which is basically like a high tunnel that you can, it's a little more mobile. But we've been growing ginger, turmeric, and galangalin as part of a grant to kind of find out how well that can be grown in Illinois and trying to work out some of the kinks with that.
Yeah, those are things that like a hotter climate, right?
Yep. So we can, so with that, we'll put plastic on it. Usually we don't plant, we're not planting until May. So the danger of frost is past here, where I'm at
Yeah.
in central Illinois. And then in the fall, we'll put plastic on there to try to extend that season a little bit. I actually got done harvesting that today. Harvested much later this year than typical, just because we've had such a warm
Yeah.
fall. We've had a few frosts, but nothing cold enough to kill the plants and stuff.
How far is your campus from, just so people have a reference, from Chicago?
Um, so I'm not actually on campus. I'm in Jacksonville, Illinois. So I'm about 3.5 hours southwest of Chicago.
Southwest
So
of
I'm actually
Chicago.
closer to St. Louis, Missouri than I am
Oh,
to
okay.
Chicago.
I see. All right. Yeah, no, I spent 2 summers in Ann Arbor, Michigan when I was in graduate school. And we would, uh, during each of those stints, we would rent a car and go to Chicago.
Mhm.
And we all looked like, you know, whoa, look at this big city, kind of thing. I come from Canada, right? So it was great though. Um, okay, and your home garden, what do you got going on there?
So we grow all kinds of stuff. So again, because it's been a warm fall, the only thing that's dead in my garden right now is the corn, and that's only because it's an annual. But
Wow,
we've got tomatoes and peppers.
you still have tomatoes.
Peppers, they were still had flowers on them
Are they
about 2 weeks
covered?
ago.
You had
Nope.
frost?
We had a frost, but not bad enough to kill them. I've got a little bit
Really?
of like tip burn on the leaves, but they're still going. I mean, they're not putting out a whole lot. They have got some flowers on them, but we
Wow.
have that. We grew celery last couple of years. We do artichokes, different. We got jelly melon, the horned melon. We've tried growing that. Lima beans. Did some yard long beans, potatoes, onions, garlic. I usually try to grow something new every year. I've grown peanuts in the past.
Wow.
We grow cotton every year
You grew
just for the heck
cotton.
of it.
What do you do
So
with it? You just grow it and
I've got a grocery bag full of cotton we
you
picked over
haven't
the years. I just
you haven't
don't do
got the
anything with
thing
it.
going. You haven't turned it into thread or something
It's,
like that.
we just grow it to say we can grow it, and you do carrots and all that stuff too. So
Right.
your traditional stuff and some not so traditional garden stuff.
Okay, so we got going to talk about ladybugs. I guess we should get into it. So I got a number of questions here that came to mind when I was reading your article and things I thought viewers might be interested. I'll put links to the article and your blog and your podcast in the show notes for this here, so people that want to find it can do that. But yeah, first question, and the answer is almost implicit in the question, but anyway, how can I tell a multicolored Asian ladybug from a native ladybug?
Yeah, so our multicolored Asian ladybug, lady beetle, ladybird, whatever you want to call them,
Ladybird.
they're going to be a little bit larger than our native species. A lot of native
Oh,
species are like a quarter inch or smaller. These are quarter inch, maybe a little bit bigger, um, and they're a little bit more. For the native ones I usually see, they're a little bit more rounded as well, and they can be very variable in color. So they can be red, they can be orange, yellow, orange. Thus the multicolored name. Um, and as far as spots go, spots can range from no spots to 19 or 22 spots and everywhere in between on them.
oh,
So
really?
there's a lot of variability with them. So it can be, if you just look at it, sometimes it's easier said than done to identify them. But a lot of them on the pronotum, so that area up by the head, kind of between the head and the wings, a lot of times there's kind of an M-shaped pattern on there,
Hmm.
which can be used to identify them. Sometimes you can see that, sometimes you can't. The two-spotted lady beetle, which is a native species, has a similar pattern, but they're smaller. But that's one way when you look up how to identify them, that's one way that people commonly describe is that M-shaped pattern. But that, say, probably 95% of the time, that'll be there, but occasionally it's not. And there are some black morphs, black color morphs, so that's black body and stuff with
Hmm.
red spots. But we don't really see those much in North America. The ones we have in North America are more the red to orange coloration.
All right. And like, so you said so if there's one with like say 7 spots and one with 15 spots, are they the same species? Or are these all different varieties of a species? Are these like
They,
a beagle and a Labrador and a Springer Spaniel? Like, or are they all? just cats, the same kind of cat, but different color cats.
But you kind of think of that way, yeah. The spots can be variable, but yeah, they're all the same species, that Harmonia
Oh,
axaridus. Yeah,
oh,
0 to
okay.
1922. There's that variation within the population. Some insects you don't see a whole lot of variation in them, but these lady beetles are an example of one that you can have a lot of variation in the appearance.
Oh, okay. All right. Um, and are they, what about range? Like, are they everywhere in North America? Are there some that go further north than others, or some that are on the East Coast or West Coast, or the Central?
I think pretty much everywhere in North America. Maybe further north you get probably not so much. Farther up north into Canada where it's getting really really cold. Um, but anyway, I think everywhere in the United States has them. I think they've got them in Hawaii and Alaska, but the lower 48 everywhere and everywhere across the border into Canada
Are they
is going to
breeding?
have them
Do they,
too.
are they breeding here? Like, are they
Yep. So that, yeah,
self-sustaining?
yep. Up, yeah, up in your area, there's Bugwood or not Bug Guide is a kind of an online repository, so people can take pictures and submit them, and people will identify them and stuff. It's run through Iowa State University, and you can go and look for where pictures have been sampled or submitted from, and all across Canada, there's pictures that have been taken of this particular insect. So it's kind of like iNaturalist a little bit, but it's specific to insects.
And they're self-sustaining, like they're like the ones we have here aren't here because they're perpetually being brought here. They're here because they're breeding here.
Yeah, they're probably going to be established. Yeah, they're not
They're
migrating
established.
in
Okay.
necessarily. Yeah.
So I guess that also, I guess since that tees up the question, why do we have them here?
So they've been introduced, I think it was back in 1916, if I remember the date right. They were first introduced into California to help control aphids and pecans. That population didn't establish, and throughout the coming decades, they were introduced multiple times into the United States, a couple times into Canada to try to control aphids. But none
Hmm.
of those populations really ever established. It wasn't until, if I remember, in 1988, there was a population in Louisiana, I think around New Orleans, where they found a population that had established. Now,
Hmm.
nobody's really sure if that was from a release or if that was brought in on like a ship, an overseas ship.
Oh,
And at that point, they were introduced. That population got established, and it's basically since 1988 where they've spread. And there's been some human-assisted spread too, but it wasn't really until 1988 when they got established in the United States.
oh, so it wasn't the case there was some like we don't know if it was like an agricultural application like these pecan orchards you were talking about, or just they happened to be on some stuff
Yep, that they got
on a
imported in.
ship.
Yes, yeah. Nobody's for
Right.
sure. I think a little bit depends on what you're reading and who you're talking to. Some
Yeah,
people are
yeah.
more pro shipping. Some are more. This was maybe an introduction that wasn't recorded or something like that, or
Uh,
however it happened. They've rapidly spread across North America.
and where were they from? Like, are they from Thailand or China or Japan, or do we know?
So I think China, Russia, I think into the Koreas and stuff. So kind of that,
Oh,
I guess West or Eastern Asia and stuff.
oh,
So
wow. Wow, it's amazing that, and it's also amazing that they took so many, like, I imagine the first few applications, they were like, okay, I guess they're not going to establish it. I guess we don't have to worry about it. And I mean, why were they brought here as opposed to just like we have a stocking program here for trout, and in some cases we use native speckled trout. That's the native trout to here. But in other lakes that are completely, or at least they think are completely closed off from the ecosystem, they use rainbow trout, which are not native to here at all. I think they're also called steelhead, because they don't want them. If they get established, they'll kind of wipe out everything else because they're bigger and faster and stronger and so on and so forth. But maybe they're just not indigenous to the region. But they raise the native trout in little aquariums and they release them into the lakes. Why would they have brought in beetles from afar when they could have just bred? Maybe they didn't have the technology to breed them, or is there something unique about how they transport or something, where there's just piles of them that they're easy to
Mhm.
catch. You have any idea?
So, so I think kind of a lot of the initial ones that were more for there's a kind of an aphid complex that gets on pecans, and I think they're trying to find some kind of lady beetle that's going to help manage that. I don't. So I'm assuming that our native pop beetles weren't doing a good enough job
Uh,
for that. I don't know if that's for sure. My assumption would be that's probably why, and they're looking for other lady beetle species and multicolored Asian lady beetles. They're I guess semi-arboreal, so they'll go into trees and stuff and go after these. But they brought them in for pecans, but they were also feed on soybean aphids, which is an introduced species. So we find them in all kinds of different habitats, not just trees.
oh, so our native, so use the term arboreal meaning into trees. Um, are our native ladybugs not arboreal? Like, do they prefer not trees?
Still depend on the species. I think there's something like 600 species north of Mexico. So some of them
Really?
are going to be more into trees. Some of them are going to be more prairie. It'll just depend on the species. Some of them, are feeding on insects. There are some species that will feed on like powdery mildew. They'll be feed on fungus.
Oh,
There's
really?
even some species that'll feed on plants. So like your
Uh,
squash beetle,
yes.
Mexican bean beetle. Those are lady beetles that just happen to feed on plants.
Oh, that's a problem. Yes, they're not all good, I
So
guess.
yeah, it's not all good.
So when it comes to these multicolored ladybug, is it a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, I guess they're here and they're not going anywhere, and we're never going to extirpate them. I mean, you can speak to that. Maybe that we've got some master plan to extirpating them, but um, is it a good or bad thing that they're here? What is their effect on other ladybugs and the ecosystem in general?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of good, a little bit of bad. So again, they're feeding on aphids and other like pest insects. Some may feed on some mites, mealy bugs, things like that. So they're feeding on what we consider pest insects. So that would be kind of a benefit to them, and they're feeding on a wide range of those in different habitats and stuff like that. They're pretty good generalist predators, and they can feed on quite a few like aphids and stuff. So like in the larval stages, it can be like 300 some aphids that a single larvae will feed during its development. Adults can feed on 50, 60 aphids a day. So we can get some pretty good pest control with those. The drawback, though, is that um, they can outcompete our native populations because they are so voracious. Um, they may feed on our native lady beetles, so they feed on their eggs or their larvae, things like that. They're much more I guess, aggressive than a lot of the native species. So they will feed on them. They'll feed on multicolored Asian ladybees will feed on their own eggs and larvae and stuff when food populate or food levels get low, aphids and stuff. But they'll also feed on the native species. So in some areas, you would see a decline in native lady beetle populations when multicolored Asian lady beetles start showing up. Sometimes you see that, sometimes you don't. There's some in some places, I think in Missouri, they did some research and they found that maybe those populations were already in decline when multicolored Asian lady beetles showed up. So there's probably multiple factors for native populations declining, but they're certainly not helping the situation there. Um, they have found sometimes they can get into like fruits and stuff. So like softer skin peaches, brambles, raspberries, blackberries, things like that. They may feed on those again if insect populations are low, they don't have a lot of food, they may get into those. If you grow grapes, they can be a problem with grapes because they get into the grape clusters when they're harvested, especially if you're using them for wine. When you crush them, lady beetles, when they're disturbed, they'll do reflex bleeding. So they'll kind of squirt out a liquid out of their leg joints,
Oh,
which
nice.
smells bad, tastes bad. But when you get that into grapes for wine, that can taint the wine, called ladybug taint. So if you have a lot of these getting into those clusters when they're being processed for wine and stuff, that can cause issues.
Is that something native ladybugs would do, or it's just the multicolored ones?
So native lady beetles will do the reflex bleeding too, but I don't think they're not as big of an issue in grapes and stuff. Getting into the clusters as like the multicolored Asian lady beetle is.
What's I mean, sentimentality aside about, our native lady beetles. Let's say all the native ladybugs were outcompeted and were like passenger pigeons, 50 years from now, and all we had was Asian or the multicolored lady beetles, would the effect sort of would they just pick up where the native ladybugs left off? Like they're just eating the same things, only eating the same things, but causing some problems in the wine industry and a few other things. But otherwise, they're like, is there some problem the indigenous ladybugs are currently solving that if they were gone, the multicolored ones would not solve? It's a better way of putting it. Or would they,
Um,
or would they just solve everything better and kill more aphids?
so I think some of our native ones they're probably fitting different niches in the environment
Right.
than the multicolored Asian, and the just the general lack of biodiversity is never a good
Oh,
thing.
yes,
Never
because
a good thing
we've
either.
got,
So
what did you just say, 300 or 600? How many varieties?
600 north of Mexico. I think when I looked before the show, I think Canada has like 150, 160 species of lady beetles
Really?
across all of Canada. So,
Wow. And the multicolored is just one?
yep, that's just one of them. And so
Wow.
there's I think in Illinois, I don't know exact numbers, but in Iowa next door, I think they've recorded like 80 some species. I think it's kind of like with bees and stuff. We tend to think of one or two different species, but there's all this diversity that we overlook a lot of times.
I see. So it's the threat to the biodiversity, and a biodiverse population is just it's more stable over time because it's insulated against risk.
Yeah,
You're not going to have one disease come and kill them all, every single species. It'll just kill a few of them or knock a few of them back. So if we only had multicolored beetles, there could be one thing that comes along and just causes a devastating crash in their population, and then we have the aphid infestation like
yeah,
no one's ever like something out of the Bible, right? So
yeah.
okay,
I mean, you think about like with like elm trees or
a Dutch elm, yes,
Dutch elm trees that came and
yeah.
wiped all that out. We replaced all the elm trees with ash trees. And it was some parts of Illinois and like urban areas, 20, 30+% of their canopy was in ash trees. Well, now emerald ash borers come in and wiped all those out. So you put all your eggs in your basket in one basket. You're setting yourself up for failure potentially because something comes in and wipes all that out. Now there's nothing there.
I remember, yeah, when I was teaching at Acadia University here, they had some huge Dutch elm trees, and they had to cut them all down. And I mean, these things were like you could put your arms around them, like that sort of thing. Huge trees, and they just had to just waste them. So yeah, that was a real shame. Um, okay, so let's say I'm out in my garden and I'm having a look around, and I see multicolored beetles or ladybugs in my garden. Should I do anything, or is there anything I can do, or should I just leave them? Because it's beyond my control. It'd be like shaking my fist at a hurricane. Like,
Yeah, they have a little bit of a shaking your fist at a hurricane. Yeah, and then when I see them in my garden, I leave them. They're the ones I predominantly see, but I do still see some other lady beetle species in my garden, like the pink spotted lady beetle is the one I commonly see that one. A few others, but yeah, they're pretty widespread. You could collect them all and kill them all, but for every one you kill, there's probably thousands more that'll eventually move in, and they're mobile. They can fly, so you can get rid of all of them, but they'll just others will move in eventually.
it's like a zombie invasion.
Yeah, pretty much.
I keep saying ladybug. I should be saying lady beetle. Why is the
Well,
distinction? What I'm using the wrong word. I mean, you're a scientist, so
technically it's lady because they're beetles. So that's lady beetle. Lady. So bugs are a specific type of group of insects, like your true bugs. So that'd be like your stink bugs, assassin bugs. So I mean, you can use it whatever you want, but so like you're some Jeopardy. Huh? You guys get Jeopardy TV
the
show,
show. Yeah,
game
yeah.
show,
Alex
yeah.
Alex Trebek's a Canadian. Well,
Okay.
he's
Was
not there anymore, but yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
yeah. So there's some
He
Jeopardy
loves
information.
Jeopardy.
Jeopardy information for you if you're ever on there. So if you write ladybug is one word because it's not a true bug. So, but lady beetle is two words because they're true beetles. Just like dragonfly is one word because they're not true flies, whereas housefly is two words because they're true flies.
Oh, okay. All right, that makes sense.
Yeah,
So
lady. If you say ladybug, everybody knows what you're talking about. People
right.
kind of look at me weird for calling them lady beetles, but And if you're in England, they're ladybirds. And a lot of Europe, it's kind of a version of ladybird. So,
Really? Wonder why they used that word. That's
so,
probably something very old.
so for that one, I was it the seven spot lady beetle. With the Virgin Mary because it's colored red. It has seven spots for the seven joys and seven sorrows of Mary.
Oh my
So that was
goodness.
kind of got the ladybird, and that just kind of got all lady beetles got kind of grouped into that.
I see. Jeez. Um, oh, yeah, that was the other question. I've seen this. I haven't seen it here, but when I lived in Ontario for 6 years, and there was one day I saw a swarm of these lady beetles inside, like up near, like where up near the roof. They must have gotten in through a crack. I don't know if the native lady beetles do that. Um, so I guess this two-part question: do the native lady beetles do that, or is that a specific behavior to the multicolored lady beetles?
Yeah, so some of the native lady beetles they'll still aggregate, not necessarily on homes. Like so the pink spotted lady beetle, that one I commonly find like aggregations under bark on dead trees and or logs, something like that. The convergent lady beetle is a native species. They will aggregate in areas. But with multicolored Asian lady beetle, a lot of times they are going in aggregating on homes and stuff, which is an annoyance to a lot of people. So they're kind of attracted to kind of tall out. So in their native range, a lot of times they're overwintering on like rock faces and stuff like that, and they'll get into the cracks and crevices and stuff. Here in Illinois, we don't have any mountains or anything like that, so we're lacking a lot of that. So they're kind of drawn to isolated objects. In a lot of areas, that's going to be homes, and especially if you have a lot of color contrast. For whatever reason, they're attracted to that too.
Oh,
And a lot of times you see them on the south and west side of buildings because those are going to be the warmest areas. So they're attracted to those. They'll aggregate in those areas, and they'll look for cracks and crevices that they can spend the winter.
and can they survive, or they just what do they do when they?
Yeah, so like on your typical house, they may get under the siding and they'll just hang out there for the winter. They may get up in the soffits, make their way into the attic. If it's an area that's kind of that stays consistently cool, you don't have those big temperature fluctuations, but it's staying cool. They'll overwinter there. Sometimes they'll make their way into homes. And when they do that, our homes typically aren't going to be cool enough, and they'll just kind of burn through those fat reserves rather quickly, and they'll end up dying. But those that stay cool, they're kind of hibernating, so to speak. They'll slowly use those fat reserves. Then they will, when it warms up again in the spring, then they'll leave those areas
Oh,
and disperse.
okay. So yeah. So and I guess would they be more prone to doing that the further north you went, like in places where it gets down to? Apologies, I'm going to use Celsius here, but like in the minus 20 Celsius, minus 30 Celsius, really, really cold. Would they be more inclined to find a house as opposed to debris or something?
I don't think that. I think they're just looking for somewhere. I don't necessarily it matters too much. I think they do have a lower limit. I think it's 16 degrees Celsius. So for the Americans out there, that's like 3-4 degrees Fahrenheit. When they get too cold, they will die. So there's a lower limit to the temperatures they can
You mean you
withstand.
mean minus 16 Celsius?
Yeah,
You mean?
minus
Yeah,
16. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
they do have that lower limit. So they're looking for these somewhat protected areas to kind of protect them from those really cold temperatures and stuff.
I see. Yeah. I'll have to look. I mean, it's too late now. I'm not going to see too much. It's getting kind of cold now. I think, what's the temperature today? I was just outside. Remember there's a Chinese place I love to go for lunch, and I didn't go today because it was too cold. I think it was down just above freezing today. Um, but just gonna see the weather here. Yeah, I think it's -1, so it's just below freezing tonight, and then it's 4C tomorrow, and it's basically like 7C all week. So it's getting, yeah, we're not going to see too many things flying around right now.
Yeah.
I think we're past that time of the year here. It's getting cold.
Yeah.
Uh,
And so with these, so the kind of the temperature kind of triggers this aggregation, this kind of this need to aggregate and find somewhere to over. So typically, when we have warm days, usually in kind of the mid 60s. I don't know what that would be in Celsius. I
Oh,
didn't do my
that
homework.
would be like in the teens, you
In the
know.
teens. So usually after we have a significant drop in temperature, usually near freezing, and then it kind of warms up again, that kind of triggers them to start this aggregation. So a lot of times, here in Illinois, this is going to be sometime in maybe late September, October timeframe.
Right.
Kind of get that first frost, and
Yes.
then it warms up again, and that kind of drives them to start looking for somewhere to overwinter.
How do they find each other? Is it some pheromone type thing,
So
or they're just
they're
drawn to the same sort
yeah
of
yeah
structures?
they're kind of looking for the same thing, so
I
they'll
see.
just kind of build up in one area. So like where I live in town, so I get some on my house, but I don't get a whole lot because I've got houses all around me.
Right.
But if you're out in the quote unquote country, so to speak, where you don't have buildings as close to each other, you're probably seeing them more
Oh, like a
in that
farmhouse or
situation
whatever. Yeah.
because you've got that isolated building,
Yes,
whereas in town you've got there be a little more dispersed, more areas that they would find attractive to overwinter in.
that makes perfect sense. I was going to ask, so how are we've talked about the multicolored ladybugs. How are our ladybugs different in terms of their behavior and their life cycle, or are they really different at all? They're just less intense and maybe more specialized in some cases. Is that
Yeah, so they're all going to have basically the same life cycle. So they have that complete metamorphosis. So you have the egg, you have the larva stage, and there'll be several larval instars. They'll pupate and they'll turn into adults. So all beetles are going to have that life cycle. Our native species, they tend to be a little bit smaller than the multicolored Asian lady beetle. Um, and again, most of them are going to be predatory, so they're feeding on usually small, soft-bodied insects,
right?
aphids, mealybug scale, things like that. There are some of those that will feed on fungus like powdery mildew. We do have those few plant-feeding species and stuff. Any of the multicolored Asian lady beetle, they seem to be more, um, I guess, aggressive when going after food than some of the native species, which is why they can outcompete them. And they may feed on the native species more than native species feed on them and stuff.
So a lot of gardeners they get some aphids on their plants. Let's say they get aphids on their I don't know, lettuce or what. I don't know. That's not a good example because I don't think I've ever had aphids on my lettuce. I'm trying to think of a plant. I don't really have too much of an aphid problem here.
I
I
get them
tried to.
on, and for like vegetable garden, in my garden, tomatoes, peppers, sometimes I get them like on milkweed. You see them a
Milkweed.
lot. The oleander, the yellow aphids, which is an introduced species. Here we get them on milkweed quite a bit.
Right. I think I tried to grow some sort of bean one year, like maybe fava beans or something, and I had really bad aphids on them. Um, anyway, so you have a gardener, they got an aphid problem on a plant, and let's say they spray it with some insecticidal spray. What kind of risk is that posing? So, I mean, as gardeners, we want all the beneficials we can have in our garden. Of course, if you've got a really bad pest problem, we should probably do a whole separate podcast on this because I'd love to pick your brain on this topic, but let's just keep it confined to the lady beetles today. I got a bad pest problem and I'm watching everything get eaten alive. I want to just rain poison down on these things, get rid of them. But at the same time, I don't want to, you know, uh, decimate a beneficial population that could be doing all the work for me and be saving me all this, you know, the chore of having to regularly and repeatedly and dedicatedly spray. So yeah, how do I solve my aphid problem without messing up my lady beetle population?
Yeah. So what I commonly recommend people when you get clusters of aphids. Usually, you can spray them off with a strong stream of water. You do that a couple times. A lot of times, that'll take care of your problem or really reduce those populations. And if you wait long enough, I'm not saying all the time, but a lot of times those native your predatory insects, whether it's lady beetles, parasitoid wasps, lacewings, those things will move in. They'll lay their eggs, or the adults. In the case of lady beetles, the adults will eat them too. So if you're patient, a lot of times, nature will find it and take care of it. If it's a really bad infestation and you can't wait, you're starting to get plant damage. Strong stream of water, a lot of times a couple times will do the trick.
Right. I used to always have I would let my parsnips go to flower, and that was the only thing always. For some reason, when the parsnips went to flower, it'd be just covered in aphids, and it didn't really matter because it would still form seeds. And I don't know what the aphids were doing, but I'd always get, I guess because I didn't care. Like,
Mhm.
I'm going to get 1,000 seeds, and if the aphids destroy half of them, I still have 500 seeds. How many parsnip seeds do you really need, right? It didn't really matter
Yeah.
to me. So I just let nature take its course. And I don't remember seeing too many beetles on mine, but I remember seeing wasps and some kind of fly. Like it looked like just a fly.
Syrphid flies, hover flies, probably.
Right. Yeah, and it would just be swarming with these flies around the aphids. And I always thought like, okay, I didn't do it this year, but it's a good thing to have this aphid colony that attracts aphid predators in a way where I'm not spraying any poison on anything,
Hmm.
and just keeping those predators around, keeping them in the area. They're gonna, I don't know where they lay their eggs or whatever, but just sort of creating my own little aphid predator colony for whenever do plant something that aphids are going to get on. Is that a good thing to do?
Yeah, so you see that in like greenhouses. Now they have banker plants. So a lot of times that you've got your crop that you're growing, and they'll put in wheat or something that have aphids on there that aren't going to affect their cash crop. And that those banker plants,
Banker.
they they can use those aphids on there to sustain the populations of those natural enemies, so that when they do show up in your cash crop, they can move over. So it's kind of like the same thing you're doing in your garden, having flowers. So like lady beetles, some lady beetle species, if there's not a lot of aphids or things they can feed on, the adults may switch over to pollen, feeding on pollen. Your syrphid flies, your parasitoid wasps, those adults are going to feed on nectar and pollen. So having those floral resources available for the adults, that'll draw them in. And then if you've got those pest populations that they can lay their eggs on or in, um, they'll be there too. So
Are they called banker plants because it's like a beneficial insect bank? Is that the idea? Is that what they're
yep,
called? Banker? Oh,
yeah.
interesting.
So
I never
usually
heard
you're
that term.
growing, yep, you're growing a lot of some type of grass crop. So you have those aphids on there that aren't going to go into like your tomatoes or something. Those aphids won't feed on them, so you don't have to worry about them getting onto
Oh,
your cash crop and stuff.
they're specific to that particular plant.
Yep. So but they can sustain those populations of your natural enemies, so that
Yes.
when they do show up on your tomatoes or whatever your cash crop is, they're already there and
Ah,
established.
I see. And so if it's yeah, okay, see, and then the population will just grow for that season for a season or two while it takes that. That's really neat. Um, oh, a final question about the multicolored lady beetles. Do they interbreed with the native populations in any way? Is there any evidence
I
of that?
I am not aware of any.
Right.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not aware of any interbreeding with native populations.
You should put some in a jar and shake it around.
See what happens. Give them, play them some mood music and
Exactly, that's right. Get some Barry White, or the Lady Beetle version of Barry White.
light some candles for them. And
Exactly. Yeah. Um, okay. That was all the questions I had about lady beetles. Really, is there anything else you think we need to know?
so I think we kind of mentioned it, with lady beetles or really any natural enemies, providing habitat for them. If you want to have them in your landscapes for whatever reason, you like seeing them,
Oh,
you want them to control your pests. Having those flora resources for the adults that they can feed on when you don't have those insect populations, those overwintering areas, so like brush piles, things like that. So they have somewhere that they can overwinter and stuff. So, if you're doing, um,
or like a
if you're providing,
south-facing brush pile, sir. Ideally, like a south-facing brush pile.
yeah, it could be. If you're providing habitat for pollinators and stuff, you're probably doing this stuff already, or hopefully you're doing this stuff already. A lot of the stuff that's going to benefit pollinators and stuff is going to benefit a lot of these natural enemies too, because they will feed on nectar and pollen as well.
I see. Okay, so you've got lots of, yeah. I mean, it's funny because I don't plant all these plants they say you should have for pollinators. I just have so many plants. There's always flowers anyway, like
Mm,
I've got raspberries and blackberries and strawberries, and there's always some things flowering. Uh, and my garden's surrounded by a field and a forest. It's all wild, so
yeah.
there's just stuff. If you go out there in August, there's a hum.
Mm,
There's just things around all the time. But for
yeah.
someone in a more maybe more suburban or urban setting, having just a lot of different kinds of flowers and things
Things
like
will.
that.
Yeah, and I know in here in Illinois, in the United States, there's a big native plant movement, and I'm assuming it's the way in Canada too.
Yeah.
Um, but just because you have some of these ornamental plants, as long as they're not invasive, there's nothing wrong with having those. They can still
Yeah.
provide those floral resources, like autumn joy sedum. I've never seen a plant in the fall that's not covered in bees and stuff. I mean,
Oh,
that's
the
not
sedum,
native.
yeah. And they're
You don't need,
kind of idiot-proof plant to grow, the
yeah,
sedum, and they look nice.
I think a lot of times. This is my personal opinion. I think we've gone a little too far at times with the native plants. We've kind of vilified anything that's not native.
Right.
But some of these non-native ornamental plants, as long as they're not invasive, can still do a good job of providing those floral resources. The autumn joy sedum, your zinnias, your cosmos, some of these commonly grown plants, we're still providing these resources. They're not native, but they're still fitting what we're trying to do.
Oh,
So
believe
you don't have to go out and rip out your whole landscape and do everything native. You can
me.
slowly do it, or just try to incorporate natives into your already established landscape.
And perennials, I guess too. Like I've got
Mm,
um, what is it? On the south side of my house, I've got um, thyme, sage, and savory, winter savory. But they're like 2 feet in diameter, and they're perennial, and they're there for years.
mm,
And in the fall, you don't want to go and grab a handful of that in the evening because it's going to be full of bees.
yeah.
But I think there's always something overwintering in there, the sort of ideal habitat. But I'm also a huge fan of the sedum because they're so idiot proof to grow. You can just chop them in half and stick them in the ground, and
Yep.
they're just wonderful. You got one neighbor with a sedum. Before you know it, everybody on the street's going to have some because I'm chopping them up, breaking them up.
Yep.
Okay, we should ask you about. I teased asking about the Disney World. So, when were you working at Disney World, and what were you doing there as a horticulturist
So after I graduated my bachelor's, I went
or a
down to
biologist, I guess?
yeah, I went down to Disney World. So I was an intern. I was the entomology intern.
This is the
Uh,
Florida one.
yeah, the one in Florida, in the Orlando area. So they've got 4 different parks. So I was at Epcot, at the land pavilions. They have hydroponic greenhouses there. So I was an entomology intern there for a year. So it's a 6-month internship. I did 2 internships down there.
Wow. And what were you doing? Like, so this is a this is a garden that's indoors, right?
Yep.
In
Yeah.
a
So
controlled environment.
mhm.
And you're an entomologist, so you're studying bugs. So the bugs that are there, they're the ones that I'm using bugs in the vernacular. Um, they're Are these ones that have been introduced, or they just found their way in,
So these are
or both?
what we're primarily doing is for pests and stuff. So when I was there, we'd do tours to the greenhouse. We'd give tours of. Most people didn't care about the insects; they wanted to see the plants. So oftentimes people were disappointed because I want to talk about insects, not plants. But um, so we reared some parasitoid wasp for vegetable leaf miner that we would release.
Mm,
We reared some predatory mites that we would release in the greenhouses, and we'd order stuff in and release that as well. So I was in charge of maintaining those insect colonies. We go out and scout for pests. The second 6 months I would spray for pests and stuff in the greenhouse as well. So
how do you rear wasps? Stick them in a
so
jar, get the berry white.
kind of so for these we would grow green beans. And we would introduce them into a cage that had the vegetable leaf miners, so they would lay their eggs in there. So the leaf miners, they're laying their eggs in between the upper and lower leaf surface,
Okay.
um, and the larvae are tunneling through there, feeding on the leaf tissues. So then we'd get those in there, and then take those plants out, put them in a greenhouse, let them grow. put them into a cage that had the parasitoid wasp in there. So those wasps would then go in, lay their eggs in those larvae, and develop. And then we'd then pull those out, collect the pupae that would drop out, and hold on to those. And then, we release those into a cage, and then we would sex out the wasps. We have male and female, so we have the right. So we could put those into the cages and stuff. And then we would collect the pupa and stuff and then release those in the greenhouse or in the park to help with some of the pest management.
That must have been, I mean, you're doing this one by one? Like, it sounds really very tedious.
So when you release them and sex them, it once you do a few times, it's pretty easy. You just have an aspirator in there and suck them up and stuff. And you don't need a whole lot of them. We wouldn't need a whole lot of them. I don't remember the numbers. This was almost 20 years ago. So
Right.
everything is getting a little fuzzy.
Yeah.
But we'd release them in the cages and they would do their thing and stuff. And then we'd collect pupa and stuff to be released.
Did you live in Disney World when you were there, or were you like somewhere nearby?
That was nearby, but I didn't live
Nearby.
on property.
I see. Yeah, I've always I haven't. I think my parents took me there once when I was a kid, and I just remember their big lineups. So,
Yeah.
this would have been like the probably like 1984, like a long time ago, right?
Mhm.
I remember the big lineups there.
Yes, I
And
was
it
there
was like near
from
the beach.
June of 2006 to June 2007
Wow.
was when
Yeah.
I was there.
Wow. Yeah, that's 19. That's not 1984.
That's when I was born. So
Wow. There you go. Famous year from a famous book, right? Here, I got it right there. Great. All right. Well, man, this is great. I think, yeah, if you've got the time, I'd love to have you on again to just talk about, trying to propagate, facilitate beneficials in the garden and how to control problem insect populations when they really flare up. That would be good. I mean, we can do it anytime, right? Probably sometime before next spring, because that's when people start, like flea beetles. Speaking of beetles, if you know stuff about flea beetles, I want to talk to you about flea. I got flea beetles like you wouldn't believe in my garden. And yeah, I'd love to pick your brain about flea beetles because they're a problem. They're a
Yeah,
real problem.
they're kind of tricky.
Yeah, and they're not as easy to deal with as people. You go online, it's like, oh, just use a row cover. It's like, well, they can get underneath that.
Mm.
So it's yeah, it's easier said than done. So yeah, if you've got time, I think that'd be a great episode to do.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Okay, but until then, yeah, it's great having you on your show. I can't wait to have you on again. I hope you have a great well, great. Apparently, you're still having a great growing season as it is. I still got a few things in the garden. I still got my kale out there because it's really, it gets really good this time of year.
Mhm.
Still got a few things in the ground, but things are starting like kale looks great, but the Swiss chard is starting to kind of suffer because it doesn't like, it can handle a little frost, but it doesn't like a lot of frost. It's not as tough as people think it is. Anyway, Ken, great having you on the show. Can't wait to do this again. Everybody out there, I hope you found this interesting. If you did, please like, share, subscribe. Until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your garden. Thanks for watching. Ken, thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.